So our last screencast, we took a look at Plymouth Colony and how it developed, and now we're going to go ahead and discuss the rest of the New England colonies and how they grew and came about. First, we're going to start with Massachusetts, since we're right neighboring Plymouth and where it began. In 1630, John Winthrop, with about 900 other settlers, came to the area of what today would be Boston and settled there. Their goal was to create the perfect Christian community. They established a general court where they could make local laws, and it was made up of representatives. Now, these representatives were not really elected by the public. Instead, these were male members who were thought to be elect, which means they were thought to be special chosen people by God. And they were the ones who came together to the assembly to make up the laws for the colony. Back in England, the rest of the Puritans, remember, these were the religious groups who wanted to change the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, were feeling persecuted and discriminated against back in Britain. So a lot of them began to leave between 1629 to 1640 in what we refer to as the Great Migration. So Charles I of England decided to grant the Massachusetts Bay Company, which was a Puritan joint stock company, a charter to be able to establish a colony near Plymouth. Now, Massachusetts colony was very different than Plymouth if we think about it and how they developed. There's a lot of advantages that Massachusetts had when they came over. First of all, the area of Boston and where they settled had a good climate. It was great for settlement. It was great for farming and being able to establish themselves. They had trade that they had already established with the local Native Americans who already knew the Pilgrims from Plymouth, so they already were open to trading, and they could also trade with Plymouth Colony themselves. And the settlers came very well prepared with supplies to be able to establish themselves as a colony. So Massachusetts Bay began to grow because of this being well equipped, prepared. Many settlers survived. The colony grew, and eventually even Plymouth Colony, its neighbor, was eventually kind of swallowed up into Massachusetts until Massachusetts Bay Colony became the complete area of Massachusetts that we know as today. Connecticut was established by Thomas Hooker, who actually was a minister who lived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, but he disagreed with some of John Winthrop's leadership ideas. And he led his congregation, which is the group of people that kind of follow him as a minister. He led them to a new area to the north known of what today would be Hartford, Connecticut, and created the colony of Connecticut with the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. This became the first written constitution in North America. All male citizens, not just those who were chosen by God, so not just those elect few like in Massachusetts, all male citizens could vote in Connecticut. Very similarly, Rhode Island was established by Roger Williams, who as well was somebody who lived originally in Massachusetts. He was a minister, but his ideas differed from what was preached or allowed in Massachusetts. He believed that people should not be forced to go to church, that settlers should pay Native Americans for the land that they were using, and that the idea of church and state should be separate. So the ideas that you have for your religion should not interfere with the ideas of government and how you make laws. And this was very controversial back in Massachusetts. So because of this, he was actually banished. Right? He was sent out of Massachusetts, and those that followed him then founded the colony of Providence, right? The small city of Providence, which became later on the colony of Rhode Island. Very similar, Anne Hutchinson was a woman in Massachusetts Bay Colony, which for her was a double whammy because she was not only going against what they were saying in Massachusetts, but she was also a woman, which was unheard of, that she was kind of speaking her mind and going against the traditional practices of Massachusetts. She spoke out against a lot of the laws within Massachusetts. She believed that ministers did not need to be part of those elect few, that if you wanted to become a minister, you didn't need to have this idea that you had to be chosen by God, and who was in charge of this choosing anyway. So she and her followers were also banished from Massachusetts, and they founded a very small settlement of Portsmouth, and eventually the settlement of Portsmouth became part of the Rhode Island colony. And finally, our final New England colony was New Hampshire, who was founded by John Wheelwright. He was actually the brother-in-law of Anne Hutchinson, and he was a minister and was also kind of banished and left Massachusetts, very similar reasons, since he spoke out against the laws. He and his followers founded the town of Exeter to the north, and then later on, the area became an independent colony in 1679. So as we see throughout all of these New England colonies, right, primarily we see that the New England colonies were established from Massachusetts, right, from the idea that Massachusetts was not very tolerant when we look at it through their Puritan ideas, right? They weren't very open to suggestions. They weren't very open to conflicting views. And so a lot of these New England colonies all came about because you had groups of people who left Massachusetts or were forced to leave in order to find a place where they could actually practice their religion freely. Right? So the idea of religious freedom for the New England colonies was important because it's one of the foundations as to why these colonies were created in the first place.